بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه مباركا عليه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى جل جلاله وعم نواله، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الحبيب المصطفى صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد: وكلوا واشربوا ولا تسرفوا. وقال تعالى: كلوا من ثمره إذا أثمر وآتوا حقه يوم حصاده ولا تسرفوا. وقال: وأن المسرفين هم أصحاب النار. وقال تعالى: وإن فرعون لعال في الأرض وإنه لمن المسرفين. وقال: والذين إذا أنفقوا لم يسرفوا ولم يقتروا وكان بين ذلك قواما. وقال تعالى: ولا تبذر تبذيرا إن المبذرين كانوا إخوان الشياطين وكان الشيطان لربه كفورا. My dear respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's very interesting that we've convened this program for fundraising for Somalia. Recently I saw a little clip out of Saudi Arabia. Maybe some of you saw it as well. It's about this restaurant, a Muslim restaurant, where these people, they went to eat, and when they went to get their bill, they were charged a bit extra. And the reason they were charged extra was because they hadn't finished their dish, they hadn't finished their plate. Their serving that had been given to them, they'd left some of it, and thus they were charged a fine for that, which was, they probably didn't notice it, that it was written there, but they were happy to pay it. Essentially, this restaurant's owner, mashallah, nice Muslim brother, he's started this he's instigated this charge, that if you don't finish your plate, then you pay, and that money goes towards Somalia and other places. Now the thing is that some of those brothers that were going in there to eat, they were quite happy about paying that. But eventually what will happen is that, inshallah, it will go to some length in stopping people from wasting things. What happens is when you go to eat somewhere, especially when you have to feed someone or when you're all together, you end up buying too much. And sometimes it feels a bit embarrassing to maybe finish your plate off or to ask for a bag or a container where you can take it home. And regardless, even if you take the good stuff home, right? You know, people are into their kebabs and their meat and stuff like that. You know, they're addicted to that stuff. So they may take some of that home. But when it comes to all of these other things like the condiments and the salad and things like that, that goes to waste. Now these are Muslim restaurants we're talking about all over the world. I mean, you can observe this in Saudi Arabia when you go for Hajj or Umrah. You will notice that you go to eat somewhere, they give you this big standard plate of salad, this chutney, this thing, and different condiments. And eventually they just go to waste. Can you imagine the amount of waste that is taking place? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We're speaking about donating, right? We're speaking today about donating for the sake of Somalia. We're speaking about good things, inshallah, about Iman. It is just as miserliness will be tackled today, about why a person may not want to spend for their brothers and sisters in places that are not as privileged as the place we live in. So just as we'll be tackling the subject of bukhl or miserliness, stinginess, tight-handedness, just as we'll be speaking about that, I think it's extremely important that we have a discourse and we speak about israf or wastefulness. There's a concept in Islam called israf, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about more than 20 times in the Qur'an. He uses the word israf and musrifeen. And as bad as it may be, I mean, you can see how bad it is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls the Iblis, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls the Pharaoh, إِنَّهُ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُسْرِفِينَ, that he was of the musrifeen. He was of those who were extravagant, overly indulgent, and given to wastefulness. Now I give you an example. How much wudu does each one of us use? How much wudu does each one of us do in a daytime? And in that wudu, how much water do we use? Personally, I think if you look around in this country, right, or any Western country, you'd probably find that Muslims probably waste the most water. right? Now that's a theory I have, that I think we as Muslims, especially the practicing ones, right? The practicing ones, I think we use more water than anybody else. The reason is that we have to make wudu 4 or 5 times a day, minimum 3 times a day, 2 times a day. We have to have ghusls. It's obligatory for us to have ghusl when it's necessary. Now, the amount of water that we're using when it comes to just wudu, I'll give you an example. In the sunnah amount to use, right, which is literally like, these plastic disposable cups we have, probably about 2 of those is sufficient for a wudu. And if you think that you can't do wudu with that, you don't know what wudu means. You don't know what it means to do wudu, believe me. You can literally do wudu with 2 of those glasses of water. The reason is that it's not about bathing the hand. That's what we do. We literally put our hand under the tap and we just let it flow. We can wash our hands about 15 times over, or other people can probably wash their hands 15 to 20 times over in the amount of water we would use just to wash our hands with. And that is not an exaggeration. Inshallah, I'm going to actually do a demonstration of that some other time. I'll show you. Because if you have a basin of water, not in the masjid, but at home, if you've got a basin of water and you just put it on from the beginning to the end with a plug-in, the amount of time it takes you to do wudu, leave the water on for that amount of time, you will notice that it will probably overflow. How many cups of water is in that basin? What is it equivalent to? It's probably equivalent to about 50 or 20 cups. So where you should be able to do wudu with 2 cups, you're literally using 10 times the amount. Right? And this is no exaggeration. You could be using even more than that. Those people who have some obsessive disorder where they think they haven't washed properly, they'll probably use double that amount even. Right? But generally speaking, we're all using more than we're supposed to. Wudu in the earlier times was never done in the way where you just opened the tap and just relaxed and spoke and did other things while you washed and just let the water flow. It was never done like that. Right? We need to be able to do this in a way where we preserve the water. The minimum we can do is we open it, we get some water, and if you have those twisting taps, they're a bit more difficult. But if you've got a tap where you just pull the lever up and down, they work much better for wudu. So if you've got one of those at home, or get one of those installed, because don't open it too much. Just open it enough. Wash your hand, wash your face. When you're washing your face, because it takes a bit of time to make sure the water gets everywhere, close the tap. You just have to get the water and then you just literally bang down on it. You just push down on it, it will close, and then it will come off, and then you just wash your face. Likewise, when you're doing your masa, you're wiping off the head, the ears, and so on, close the tap. Believe me, this is extremely important. The other thing is, don't have the water on full blast. Now you wonder what is a scholar speaking about these things? We hear about this stuff from environmental green campaigners. I mean, the sheikh's gone green. What's the problem with that? Really, it is something that we have to be. It's an injunction in the Qur'an. It's an injunction in the Qur'an, and maybe you don't know it, but you're paying for this. At the end of the day, every bit of water you're using and every bit of water you're disposing, you pay for both. You pay half the price for disposing to Thames water if you're living in London, right? And you pay double that for using the water. And as Muslims, we're wasting a lot of our water. At the end of the day, we need to do our part as well. This is extremely important. Now that's just about water, right? That is just about water. When it comes to food, it's amazing, right? It is amazing the amount of wastage that even we do. I mean, in terms of the dunya, in terms of the way it works in the world, it's quite crazy because firstly, there's a wastage problem in most industrialized, progressive, first world countries. There's more of a wastage than there is in other places. First, we've got the restaurant problem. When you stay at a hotel as well, it's the same thing. What happens normally is that you use a bit of the shampoo, the rest of it has to be thrown away. Right? You use a bit of the soap, you get a bar, the rest of it has to be thrown away. There is just so much more wastage that is happening in all of these places. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I remember once I went into this supermarket while I was in America. I went into this supermarket and I saw this really nice olive bread, right? Olives in bread. It's kind of very interesting kind of loaf. So I said, how much is this? He said, would you like a taste? I said, I don't mind. I said, maybe he's got some, small pieces cut that they're giving out to taste. You go to some stores, some shops, supermarkets, they give you a bit to taste. What he did was he took that whole loaf. There were about 4 or 5 loaves in that tray. He took one loaf, took a big knife, he cut the end slice off, threw it in the bin, cut another slice, and then he handed that one slice to me. I said, okay. I looked at it. But while I was looking at that, he took the rest of that whole loaf of bread, and that bread, believe me, it cost about $6 or $7. Because it's an olive bread, it's a delicacy, it's a speciality bread. And he dumped it into the bin. Right? He trashed it. He literally went bang into the trash. I just looked at him. I said, what are you doing? I said, what are you doing? I felt so guilty. I felt so bad that for me, because I said, yes, I don't mind tasting it, he had dumped that whole loaf of bread. Right? You know, people would kill for just a slice of bread anywhere else. I'll give you another example. I was in South Africa. While I was studying there, we went to eat somewhere. Right, just quickly, you know, we were at university, we went to quickly eat. And after I'd finished, and you know, I don't normally leave food around. You know, I try to order only as much as I need generally. So, you know, the only time you'd even leave something is if you didn't really like it or something like that. I ate as much as possible, me and my friend. Then we went and dumped the package, you know, the container with the chicken or whatever it was, the bones, went and put it into the bin. Straight away, this a young man, he comes along, he goes into the bin, he grabs that out, and he opens it. And I don't know what he would have found on there, but he started doing something with it. I felt really embarrassed. Another guy comes along to me and he thanks me. I said, what are you thanking me for? He said, I thank you that you left something on it for that person. Like, I didn't leave anything. You know, I was just so embarrassed. I didn't leave anything on there. But that is the level we're speaking on. South Africa is not the poorest of the African nations. Right? South Africa is actually probably the most progressive, which is very interesting. But these are the experiences that we've had. I sat with another group of people. I was invited somewhere to this brother's house, and as we're sitting there eating in a very traditional way on the floor with a big platter of rice, Afghani style. Big platter of rice in the middle, and we're all eating from that. Right? So this is the first time I'm being invited to their house and I'm eating. So as soon as we start eating, I see that they're dropping food in front of them. It was myself, him, and his son. And as we're eating, they're taking the rice, they're mixing, you know, the curry into whatever, and then as they're eating, they're dropping. So between them and the platter, there was an amount of space on which there was the dastarkhan, you know, the piece of leather or something you put on the floor. By the end, they had enough rice in front of them, right, outside the plate, enough to feed one person. Both of them had one plate each like that. And seriously, it was embarrassing, but I said it very nicely. I said, mashallah, you know, look, we're so rich today. You know, we have so much food that we're wasting so much. You can literally feed somebody with the amount of rice that you've been dropping. But alhamdulillah, some months afterwards, when I went to their house again, now alhamdulillah, they weren't producing an extra plate right in front of them. They'd been disciplined, alhamdulillah. But these are certain things that come from culture. Another one is, I go somewhere and the person did not finish his cup of tea off. He leaves a small amount at the bottom. I said, what are you doing? He said, you know, it's considered greedy. It's considered greedy to finish off everything. It's like you're so hungry, you're so greedy, you're so poor. The main thing is not about greed. It's actually that, are you so poor that you don't leave anything? It's a sign of... you know, it's a sign of richness. It's a sign of being prosperous, that you actually leave something, that, you know, you're all very quaint and everything, and, you know, you don't drink everything. It's kind of interesting, right? So these are some habits and customs that are even within the Muslim community, which is really sad. If you look around the world, we've got a major problem. We've got a major problem, right? I mean, I'm not even going to start on bread yet. When it comes to bread, for example, they say that about half of the bread that will be sold in the shops, that will leave the bread factories, will eventually be disposed and not eaten in this country. Half of the bread that is produced in this country will be disposed. Nearly up to half of the bread will be disposed and not eaten. Because, you know, you've bought too much, buy one, get one free, you know, 2 for £2, or whatever the case is. Half of it will be disposed of, and you won't eat it because it will become fungi, you know, it will become dry, it will become stale, or whatever the case is, even though the bread these days lasts for so long. You know the kind of bread I'm speaking about? You know, the cheap white stuff that you buy, that is softer than anything else? You know that that's a bid'ah in Islam, right? The ulama mention, I mean, this is very interesting, the ulama mention, the hadith scholars mention, that the first bid'ah in Islam is the use of sieves. The first bid'ah, they said, in Islam, not bid'ah in the reprehensible term where it's like haram. This is not a fiqhi point. This is, in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they didn't use sieves to sift their flour. Literally, when the Sahabi was asked, then how did you deal with your flour? How did you make it into dough? He said, well, we got the grain, we ground it, and then after that we just went oof, oof. He says, literally, he says oof, oof, like, you just blow on it, and whatever flew away, whatever disappeared, the rest of it, we would just make that into bread. And there was barley bread generally. The Prophet ﷺ hardly ever had wheat bread. It was mainly barley bread. Wheat is more refined than barley. There wasn't any wheat in Medina Munawwara, hardly any wheat around there at the time. So they never used the sieve. But what the scholars say afterwards is that the use of the spoon and the use of a sieve, the use of the sieve is definitely the first bid'ah in Islam. But again, not bid'ah, yani reprehensible bid'ah in terms of haram. We're not speaking about that. We're speaking about the first innovation that came from outside and that messed up the Muslim community and made them focus more on the dunya. That's what they're speaking about. We're not saying it's haram to have white bread. The crazy thing today is that it costs more to buy non-white bread, unrefined bread, seeded batch. Right? Something with the grains inside, the brown stuff, it's more expensive to buy that, even though it's better for you. The white stuff, there's a problem with it. And England was the pioneer in that regard. England innovated a system for making bread which made bread very cheap. It made it very easy to make and manufacture in less than half the time, or in 1/10 of the time of the fermentation process, and so on. It's called the Chorleywood Flour Milling and Bakery Research Association Laboratory. They, in 1961, they researched and came up with this way of producing bread, making the average loaf in Britain 40% softer, right? 40% softer, reducing its cost, and more than doubling its life. And every slice was uniform. It just looked like, something that you manufactured, by hand or something like that. But literally, it's like cotton wool. The cheap white stuff, it's like cotton wool. In America, I remember I used to get this Wonder Bread. I could just never eat it. It just seemed so fake, right? Literally, it just seemed so fake. This is not bread, right? And this is generally much of the bread that you will buy. That's the mainstream bread that you just pick up, right? The white stuff, it's bad for your stomach. There's a lot of problems with it. In the bleached flour, it's processed. There's a lot of problems with it. Essentially, what they discovered at this Chorleywood process, is that by adding hard fats, extra yeast, and a number of other chemicals, then mixing it at high speed, that you were able to bake it in a fraction of the time that it normally took. But at the end of the day, there's a compromise on taste and digestion, ability to digest. That is much less than normal breads, because that's just much more natural. When it comes to global food problems, right, we've got another, literally it's like a major israf problem, a major tabdhir problem, which means a major squandering problem. And what that is the Institute of Mechanical Engineering are saying that the waste that is being caused today is mostly due to poor storage, strict sell-by dates, where after which many people, they won't even smell their product, they won't examine it, or it's out of date, they will literally throw it away. There's a lot of people who are very obsessed by that. They will literally throw away anything that's had its sell-by date, right? Then you've got, what they're saying is that the amount of food waste is up to 2 billion tons worth. 2 billion tons worth is being wasted every year. A study claims that up to 30% of the vegetables in the UK were not harvested. Right? They were just wasted, they were just disposed of because of their physical appearance. Tell me something, have you ever been into Tesco, and I thought about this some time ago. Have you ever been into Tesco, Sainsbury's or Asda and found an apple that was slightly out of shape? An orange that just looked a bit out of shape? They're all perfect. The reason is that they have to be sifted. They have to be sifted, they have to be sorted, and up to 30% is wasted. Some of it is fed to animals, the other is just literally disposed of. Why? Because the supermarkets, who are the major purchasers, it's easier to deal with a major purchaser, you just have the big accounts, right? They only want those. Now there's talks by Morrison's and others of accommodating some of the more deformed stuff, right? It's still healthy to eat, it just looks different. You know, like if you've got an apple tree or a plum tree in your backyard, you know, you'll get some deformed ones. It's just like that. It's completely fine to eat. But this is where we are with this extravagance in the country that we live in, or in the area that we live in. It says that it's actually a normal practice for farmers to assume that 20 to 40% of their fruit and vegetable crops won't go to market because it's just not the right shape or the size. It's too small. They all have to be the same. Have you noticed that every banana you buy is the exact same size and shape? They all look the same, just about in every bunch that you buy. Between 30 to 50% of the 4 billion tons of food that is produced around the world each year goes to waste. So we're talking about between 30 to 50% of all the food that is produced in the world goes to waste and doesn't go to feed people. Then we wonder why this happens. The Prophet ﷺ spoke about 2.5% of your wealth given from the rich to the poor, and that will sort the matter out. That's a really magical number. That's a miracle number. Just 2.5%. That's zakat. That will sort our poverty situation out if the people who have the money faithfully and fairly give 2.5% of their wealth. It is more than sufficient to deal with the problems in the world. Right? Now, I don't say here that we're not giving our zakat. We may be giving zakat, we may be donating huge amounts, but we are not doing something that is good, which is we're doing a lot of wastefulness. It is against the Qur'an. Shaitan wants us to do it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الْمُبَذِّرِينَ كَانُوا إِخْوَانَ الشَّيَاطِينَ. Verily, the squanderers, the wasters, those who are given to wastefulness, they are the brothers of the shaitan. Shaitan is the worst enemy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling somebody the brother of shaitan, that is a major curse. And we want to avoid that. Another problem. There's an individual whose name is Tristram Stewart. He wrote a book, a very interesting book, where he studied all of these things, where he looked and he researched this the world over, how much waste is taking place at different levels. So in his book called Waste, Uncovering the Global Food Scandal, he speaks about a number of things. He gives this chart, which is very interesting to look at. There's a median line on it. That line represents, and he's got countries over this chart, above it and below it. Most of the countries that he's mentioned and he's researched, they're above it. Very few are below that line. That line represents those countries where people value their food and don't waste. So that's like, given a tolerance factor of natural, inevitable waste that may take place. On that line are very few countries. India is on there. People don't waste much apparently in India. Right? Pakistan was just slightly above that. There were very few countries under it. The only country that was under it was Kenya and Eritrea. He may have not done Somalia, but Eritrea and Kenya, they were underneath that, which means that they're doing very well in terms of managing their food and using every aspect of it. Right? Using every aspect of it. Then above it, you've then got Japan, and then New Zealand, and then UK goes up. And one of the highest, then you've got Norway, Denmark, and one of the highest is USA, where the amount of waste that's taking place is a huge proportion. It's a huge proportion. Essentially what he said, and I guarantee you this is probably a case in England as well. You know, if all of our supermarkets, you know the amount of food that is stocked in every one of our supermarkets. It says that the US has about twice the amount of food on its shops shelves, on its supermarket shelves and its restaurants than what the people need. Double the amount. Twice the amount of food is available. You don't even need that much. Half would suffice you. Why do they keep extra? They keep it just so that they don't lose money if there's suddenly a need for somebody to come in and buy extra. You know, you will never see at the end of the day that something's needed finished, just about maybe the milk or something, some of these perishable goods. But otherwise, they've got everything stocked up more than you would ever want to buy if you went in there, unless you're from a certain background and there's a buy one get one free, and you go in and fill a whole trolley up. You know, the butter's cheap in Asda. You know, go and fill up the trolleys as people do. Right? He explains. I mean, he puts this in perspective. Imagine, he says that the entire amount of food that is produced in the world is represented by 9 parts. So, you know, the entire amount of food a year that is produced in the world, imagine that it is represented by 9 parts. You split it into 9 parts. He's explaining how much of that is actually going to be used for people, right? How much comes back for use of human consumption, right? Because, that's what we do this stuff for. We do it for human consumption. He's saying that, first and foremost, after within the 9, one part, so that's the 8th part, that's the 9th part, that you just get a loss, because in the production process there's an inevitable loss because of just something going wrong with the other. So 1 part is going to go straight before it even leaves the fields, before it leaves the production. One of the 9 parts is going to be wasted anyway, right? That's inevitable. It's very difficult to govern that and to preserve that. However, then he says that 3 parts out of the 9, we've lost 1, so we've got 8. Out of the 8, 3 parts are fed to animals. Why are they fed to animals? So because we're going to eat the animals. People have an addiction to meat. There's a hadith in Muwatta of Imam Malik in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke about meat. He says meat has a darawa. What that means is meat has an addiction. Right? Tell me who's not addicted to meat here. There's people who cannot survive one dish without meat. Even if it's a vegetable dish that their wives cook, why didn't you put some chicken in there? Why didn't you put some lamb in there? There has to, even if it's a vegetarian dish, there has to be pieces of meat in there, or a beef stock or something of that nature. People love their meat because there's an addiction. The Prophet ﷺ said there's an addiction to it. There's an addiction that is in meat. And what's very interesting is that another word for that meaning of addiction is sarif or saraf, right? Which comes from israf, comes from that same root term, which means excessive. It has an excessive addiction to meat. People have it. That's why the Prophet ﷺ, he ate meat, and he ate it very heartily. He ate the shoulder meat, he ate different parts of the meat when it came to be, and he enjoyed it. But it wasn't normal for him to do so. It wasn't the normal staple diet, right? He just about got a few dates a day. So when we're speaking about meat in general, it came by very infrequently. And today we're eating some kind of the meat or other. I mean, tell me something. How many of us actually have meat-free days at home? Who's even contemplated meat-free? MashaAllah, just one, right? Just one person here who has a meat-free day, right? I hope you're not a vegetarian, because that's another problem. Because in Islam, there's no such thing as vegetarianism. There's a Sahabi, he was sitting there with some chicken, and a person was there with him, and he said, come and eat. He said, no, I can't eat because I've seen this chicken eat some dirty stuff. He said, just come along and eat it, because that's maybe one chicken you've seen like that, right? There's no such thing as vegetarianism in Islam, right? You eat the meat. We're not calling for becoming vegetarians. We're just saying cut out the meat. I've been trying for a very long time to have a meat-free week. Right? So what we're doing is we're trying to develop a menu of just all non-meat products that we will eat for that week, and just try it out. I would suggest everybody do the same thing, to just wean ourselves of meat, right? And I think the men probably have a bigger problem with that, I think, than the women. Wallahu a'lam. From what I've seen, they want their meat. It's really important, right? So really think about that. So 3 parts of these 8 leftover parts of these original 9 parts, they go to feeding the livestock. They go to feeding your cattle and pigs and whatever else it is that's out there. Now the problem is that you'd expect those 3 parts to come back in the form of food, but it doesn't. They're very inefficient creatures. 2/3, 2 parts out of the 3 that is fed to them changes into heat and feces. So that's wasted. Only 1 part out of the 3 comes back. So meat is actually not a very profitable, very productive and efficient means of food, really, because you only get 1 out of the 3 that you put in. So now you've got 1 left, right? So now we've got 5, and then we've got this 1 that will come back from here. Now out of these 5, two of these parts, they get thrown away. Well, actually no, we've got 4 left. We've got 4, and then we got 5, the 5th one from the meat, because we gave 3 to the meat, right, to animals. So we're going to get 1 back from that, but we're not going to take that into consideration right now. We've got 4 left. Out of that, 2 more gets wasted. Right? That wastage now is in your homes. It's from our houses. How much food are we throwing away? Right? Are we looking at food? Are we just looking at a sell-by date? Are we buying too much and now we can't eat it? So we're not giving it to someone else, but we're actually going to just throw it away. The end slices of breads, right? Things of that nature. These are things that we're speaking about. Give you an example. How many of us don't waste? How many of us eat those end slices of a loaf of bread and don't waste it? Right? Okay, that's not a huge amount. That's not a huge amount, which is really sad. Which is really sad. Now, we've got half of us doing that. Half of us are not wasting it. You can't waste that. Use it for something. You know, make some thareed with it, which is sunnah. You get your leftover bread. The Prophet ﷺ used to do this all the time. You get your leftover bread. You mix it with some leftover curry in a pot. And mashallah, you've got what you call thareed, which is, the Prophet ﷺ said, is one of the best forms of food because it's so easy to make. Leftover bread, leftover curry, leftover broth, leftover soup. You just mix it together and mashallah, maybe add a few spices if you want and eat that. Really, we mustn't be wasting everything. And we can't feed everything to the ducks, right? Or the pigeons, for that matter, right? So we need not to waste this, right? Now, eventually, you're just going to be left with 4 of those 9 parts that will come back to the world for the people to eat as food, out of 9 parts. That's less than 50% of what goes in comes back out, which is really sad. Now, only one aspect of it is when we talk about our supermarkets and things like that. There are a huge amount of potatoes that will be either fed to animals or totally dumped because they're not the right shape. Maybe they've got a press in it. Maybe they've got a protrusion in it, and they're just not completely round. The potatoes we buy, they're always perfectly round generally, right? Parsnips, apples, Florida oranges, bananas in Ecuador, huge amounts are dumped every day because they're not exportable quality, and they're not given to the poor. Right? Now, in some cases, the problem is with the legislation. The problem is with government legislation that you can't just give certain foods or nearly out-of-date foods or out-of-date foods to the homeless, because there's some health risks and things of that nature. But we need to get more wise about it. We spoke about end slices of bread. Have you ever been into a supermarket, a sandwich shop, or any places like that and found a sandwich made of the end slices? How many sandwiches do you think are made each day just in the UK? Every Tesco, every place, every shop has, sells sandwiches. What happens at the end of the day? What happens to those end slices? What this man discovered is that 13,000 slices from just one factory alone per day were being dumped. These were the end slices. How many? 13,000 end slices were being dumped every single day by just one factory because they couldn't use it to make sandwiches with. That's 13,000 from one factory. Can you imagine how many factories are making this and how much? I mean, somebody needs to come up with an idea. Believe me, you'd get rich if you came up with some recipe on how to make some kind of pudding or something with end slices. You'd probably get them for free from these companies. Somebody should think of something to save the planet. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is all israf. And then we think we have no barakah in our lives because we're doing shaitani actions. We're living within that kind of a system that is doing this kind of thing. It's really something to think about. And then we're actually concerned, we're actually worried that there's going to be less food in the world. If you've got double the amount of food that anybody needs, that the whole population needs to eat in the supermarket shelves already, right? How can you think that you're going to starve? Subhanallah. In fact, one comment I read on one of these articles was very interesting. He said, this is the good thing about the Western countries. This is why we haven't dealt with famine, because we have always had more. Otherwise, if we just had enough to feed the population, then we would have run into famine when there is a shortage. The reason we have so much is because it's like a buffer zone. It's like a barrier that when there is a shortage, then we can still deal with it. I mean, they're saying that this wastage is justified so that we don't have to run into a famine once in a while. Subhanallah. I'm going to just quickly go through one scholar's understanding of wastefulness and his guidance and his solution to a problem if we have a problem with wastefulness. I know I've been focusing on food all along, but really, how many of you went and bought an iPhone 5 after having an iPhone 4 within the first 2 weeks that it came out? right? There's a few people here. Personally, I mean, look, personally, I think that was wastefulness, right? Unless you had a bad phone and you just were waiting for that. But if you had a decent phone, you're just going to get another phone, that's wastefulness. We're enticed to getting the new thing, the new, whatever it is, the new updated model. One needs to be careful about we don't make that into wastefulness. There's nothing wrong with getting it if you really need something. That's what we're speaking about. And I got nothing against Apple as such, right? I got nothing against that, but this is just generally speaking. Allama Nahlawi was a scholar from Syria. He wrote this great book on the halal and haram. And in that he speaks about wastefulness. What he says is that israf, wastefulness, it means to consume wealth, to squander it, and to spend it on that which gives you no real benefit. Which gives you no real benefit, neither religious nor worldly, of that which is permissible. It means to spend your wealth, squander it, which means spend huge amounts of it, waste it, spending in a way that you get no benefit out of it. Neither religious benefit nor worldly benefit. That's what you call squandering. Which means that if you're just buying something extra, you're buying two of a mobile phone case, for example, right? When you just need one, that's squandering. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm just going to order two, it's only £2, it's only £1, it's only this, it's only that. That kind of an attitude. That's what we're speaking about. He then says that when we talk about, he explains how people squander and waste. So he's saying that there are two ways that this happens. One is very clear, we don't need to mention it. He says it includes that which is very plain and obvious, like casting your money into the sea, into the fire, into a well or the like, which provides no benefit to anybody. I mean, nobody really does that, but he's just trying to logically speak about what people might do with their wealth. He said that's obviously wastefulness. I don't want my money, I'm just going to burn it, right? It's crazy, I know, but people will do that sometimes. Some obsessive, people with some disorder maybe. Number two, failing to pick up your fruits or crops until they become spoiled and rotten. Oh, I'll do it. You've got a nice plum tree at the back, and you're not really feeling like having those plums outside, or those olives, or whatever it is. I mean, apricots or whatever, and you just leave them there until they go bad. So neither do you let anybody else come and eat it, neither do you eat it yourself. That's wastefulness, right? This gets, if we're talking about how bad wastefulness is, he's describing this, and where do we fit into this? That's what we need to look at. Then he speaks about failing to protect food that you already have, or valuables that you already have. So you're very negligent. So things get lost, they get spoilt, they get taken away, and you don't have them. They get wasted. He then says it includes those things which are more subtle, right? For which one needs reminding, one needs other people to tell them, and which is you don't check your own wealth to see what's happening with it. You're just totally heedless to it. Another one is even things that normally don't perish, you leave it in a way, you don't safeguard it properly. For example, you buy lots of oil, right, because it's on sale. Or you buy lots of flour or something, which normally keeps for a while. But if you don't keep it properly, if you don't keep it in a cool place, what's going to happen to it is that eventually it will become rancid. It will taste bad, right? It won't taste right, and then you'll throw it away. So initially you thought you're getting a good deal, but you've actually done some wastefulness. So this is another thing. Now, these are big things that we can understand. He says another thing. He says, it also occurs with clothing and books. It also occurs with washing dishes. To wash your dishes and cutlery, or even your hands after you've eaten, without wiping or licking them. You've got food particles on your hand and you don't lick them, which is a sunnah to do. It's a sunnah to lick them. You don't do that, and you wash your hands and you waste that amount. Literally, if you leave 2 grains of rice in your plate, that is still considered wastefulness, he says. That is still considered wastefulness. Now, we're definitely in here somewhere. We're definitely incriminated here or there in somewhere. Another thing he says, failing to pick up the crumbs of bread or the like that fall on the ground. That's another israf. The Prophet ﷺ said something drops down, pick it up. If there's any dirt attached to it, remove that and eat it. Just because it's fallen down, don't abandon it. That's why it's a good practice to have something clean that you eat on. The cloth that you eat on needs to be clean so that if something does fall on there, it's fine. You can still have it. Then he says another thing. He says, which I think many of us are part of it, right? Eating past satiation. Eating past being full. So once you're full, you still continue to eat. You still have that additional chocolate. You still have that additional packet of crisps. That second dessert. May Allah protect us, may Allah preserve us, may Allah guide us. Because these are things, because we have so much, we just go for it. These are things. He then clarifies something, just in case somebody thinks that it's not permissible to have nice things. He says, as for eating delicacy foods like wearing elegant clothes, erecting tall buildings and the like, for which there's no clear prohibition in the sacred law, the correct position is that that will not be considered israf or wastefulness. That won't be considered squandering your wealth, unless it is done for arrogance and pride. So there it's about arrogance and pride. You got a nice car. If it's for arrogance and pride to show off, then it's a problem. Otherwise, it's not really wastefulness because you're using it. But if you have 2 cars that you don't use, and you've just got a few cars just to show off, then that's a major problem, right? Just to put matters in perspective. What's the cure? He gives a cure. He suggests a cure for wastefulness. First and foremost, he says, the first cure is based on knowledge, which means you have to become educated about this. How many of you knew about these practices that are taking place in our communities, that in our societies, in our production lines in this country, right? To become educated, how to store things, for example, is another thing. To realize the disastrous effects of wastefulness in this world and in the hereafter. We haven't even spoken about the punishment in the hereafter. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that such people are the brothers of the shaitan, can you imagine there must be a sin attached to it, a major sin attached to it, right? Number 2, an active solution. Based on action, he says, to force oneself to withhold. No, I don't need that. Do I really need that? Do I really need to buy that? Is it going to go to waste? Am I going to be able to use it in the time to withhold like that? Right? Especially with our children, we have to be really careful that don't put too much in their plates when we know they're not going to eat it, and then throw the rest away. We knew one family where they had to cook fresh for every meal, because they would not keep the food until the next meal, because nobody in the house was willing to eat it. Nobody was willing to eat over decent, absolutely fine food that was left over from the previous meal. The mother had to cook over and over again and discard everything, right? That should not be the case in our homes. As Muslims, we should never be doing that. He says, part of that is to remove some of the causes of this. So why would somebody be wasting? Firstly, he says, is that the person may be stupid. What that means by stupid is that there's some people who are not very intelligent. They just spend crazily without really realizing, without being able to manage their wealth. They're called the sufaha in the Qur'an, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if they're sufaha, don't give them their wealth, because they're just going to squander their wealth. They're going to just spend it right, left, right, and center. Number two is ignorance regarding the meaning of wastefulness. Now we understand what meaning of wastefulness is. Inshallah, we'll take heed. Number 3, ostentation and showing off. Not finishing your dish, putting more than is necessary, right? Just buying more than necessary and then throwing it away. Things like that. There was a Shah of Iran, his wife used to take a bath in milk, right? Instead of water. You know, that, what do you call that? You know, what kind of a problem is that? Then laziness and idleness is another problem. Oh, I can't bother. You know, there's some people, they'll just keep stuff in the fridge, and eventually those things in the fridge will get bad, but they will never look. They keep these little odd bits and bobs in the fridge, and eventually they will get bad as well. They don't have the courage to throw it away, so they let it get bad there, so then they feel a bit less guilty. That's another sad problem. Weakness of the self, this kind of shyness that a person has, that I'm not going to finish my food, or if something drops, you're eating with others, you're not going to pick it up because you feel shy that they're going to make fun of you. Be confident and tell them this is the way of our Islam. This is what the Sahaba did. They were sitting with the Persians, something dropped, the Sahabi picked up and ate it. The other one said, what are you doing? These people are going to feel embarrassed. He says, are we going to leave and abandon the sunnah of our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam for these idiots who don't understand anything? لِهَؤُلَاءِ الْحُمَقَى. Right? This is exactly for what reason? This is not israf. Israf, you're the brothers of shaitan when you do that. Another reason is a person has maybe weakness of faith. So they don't care. I don't care if Allah punishes me, that kind of an attitude. Inshallah, that's not a problem with us. But to conclude, to wrap up, we need to really think about this. The way we do, in fact, I would suggest to any masjid, if there's any representative masjids here, that we need masajid where, okay, we've got a row of taps, but then we've got the old system as well, where you've got these pots, these jugs, you fill them up, you go to the side, specially made place, and you literally, that's how you do wudu. That way you'll use the least amount of water. Right? But with the open tap, you know, these automatic taps, they have these sensor taps, they're probably very good where they have just small amounts of water coming on. That's actually a good thing. Aside from the electricity that's wasted in there, right, which is probably marginal, that is probably a good idea because less water is wasted in that. Anyway, these are some practical things that we're speaking about. The food at home, the amount we eat, the amount we buy, what we throw away, campaigning to others, speaking to others about this, right? Dealing with these kind of things, raising awareness, these are all important because we do not want to be from the musrifeen, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about them very badly in the Qur'an, puts Pharaoh as one of them, Shaitan's brother, Shaitan's brothers are called the musrifeen. So we want to avoid that. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to be concerned about our environment, to be concerned about the way we live, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless and bless our brothers and sisters around the world who are not in such advantaged positions as we are in. Right? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for our shortcomings because the world goes around. Things, events, they change all the time. Today somebody else is in adversity. Tomorrow we could be in adversity. So we must never take it for granted of how we are and who we are and where we are. Things can change tomorrow. We must thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for what we have, and inshallah we will donate and we will do as much as we can for our other brothers and sisters around the world who are not as good as in a situation as us. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.